Hello, friends and colleagues. This is Ricardo Ferraris here with my partner Vivek Kuchibotla for our weekly podcast. On behalf of Think Catalyst and our firm, where we are helping clients, advertisers, and agencies work better. And today we have an interesting conversation with Vivek that we wanted to share with you because it's not one that is at all, folk, discussed in the circle. So we think we have a very interesting podcast for you today. Vivek, how you doing? How are things?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm anxious to get started on this discussion because I think I think there's some really interesting nuggets that we're going to talk about here. And when we were preparing this podcast, I was thinking, why is it that we can recognize these things? And a phrase in Spanish kept on coming to mind. And I was thinking, how the hell do I translate this to English? So the phrase is, más sabe el diablo por viejo que por diablo,
Sure.
which for our non-Spanish speaking listeners translates roughly to the devil knows more because he's old than because he's the devil, which is extremely awkward. It doesn't work in English. So I decided to forget all of that and just say, you know what? With age comes wisdom.
There
And
you
what we
go.
want to do here is just share some of this wisdom um, about these hiding in plain sight signs, tells that are pointing to problems.
Well, you and I are not devils, so we're bringing a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of wisdom to that. But explain a second the concept of these parentheses hiding in plain sights issues that come up in advertiser and agency relationships, and then I'll throw in my 38 years of experience at agencies and running agencies and give you a few anecdotes on that.
Well, I think the big thought here is that there's yearly or every 6 month performance evaluations, and then there's net promoter scores, and there's a lot of technical scientific ways of monitoring performance and making sure that things are not blowing up. But then separately, there's signs everywhere about how well or how badly the relationship is. And the trick of this, the art of this, is to actually pick up on those signs and interpret immediately and quickly that something is happening and something needs to be fixed,
Mm,
instead of waiting till the end of the year when you're told something is wrong, but you've had a whole year um, of the bad things happening and nothing getting fixed.
right.
So this is sort of an early warning mechanism, but you only register it if you know where to look. And these things that we're going to talk about are there, they're evident, but you need to know where to look. That's a thought. That's hiding in plain sight. So
I will talk, we'll go through these now, these five, and we'll make some comments. And then at the end, I'm going to, offer and remind our audience that this is something that Vivek and I do, and we help advertisers and we help agencies understand these issues, and we help them with common sense solutions that will ultimately improve on the delivery of the work and the quality of the work. So we can talk about that in at the end. But shoot, Vivek, why don't you start with number one?
let's go.
Yeah.
Okay, number one. I think women will understand this more than men because women understand body language more than men. However, the tell is bad body language on both sides. What do I mean by bad body language? I mean, for example, when someone's name is mentioned, there's a collective eye roll or a deep sigh or some shoulder shrugging
Mhm.
Or in its most extreme instance, when all the body language cues are used up, then you start with nicknames. And nicknames can be funny, but they also reveal something that is going on in the relationship,
Sure,
right? Um,
sure.
so have you had any recent experiences of
Oh,
this kind?
not just recent, going back, and what it boils down to is that when you see that the client doesn't have full respect for what the agency is doing, that's when those body language issues start to come up, you know. And snickering comments, things that aren't really that polite, and they don't make a lot of sense. And you know, and you can also see it in the fact that maybe eventually that turns into a poor brief or a poor conversation or amount of rework that happens, and the way it's treated is clearly a telltale sign. So it's happened in my recent history here in Mexico, running a media agency with a multinational client, by the way, that we had in many countries, to the point where I actually had to get involved and not only discuss it with the client, but eventually elevate this and escalate this up with our management. And uh, not easy things to handle. I wouldn't say it got messy, but it wasn't an easy thing to handle. And by the way, it hasn't been fixed since then. And that is a
Right.
problem. And that is a problem. And there are other issues that are behind us, but we'll talk about later, but it hasn't been
Sure.
fixed. So
I just want to say that the
sadly,
body language,
sadly,
the the body language applies to the client as well, the advertiser as well. I
sure.
spent 10 years on the advertising side, and I remember a lot of snickering and a lot of eye rolling in relation to one or the other agency. I was always lucky enough to work with at least two and sometimes three agencies, and that provides an easy side-by-side comparison. And the nicknames and the shrugs and the eye rolling apply equally as well on the client side.
Right.
So that you got to be on the lookout for it, and you can't become a part of it. You have to see it, recognize it, and act on it, but you can't become a part of it.
So
That's really important.
watch out for the body language. Um, Make sure your senior team, this is what I did. Make sure your senior team, you have a conversation with your senior team about seeing this early on too, if this happens, and not have them be afraid to bring it to you. Okay,
Mhm.
because this is part of managing people and part of managing relationships.
Absolutely.
And when you do that, and of course, senior management needs to be uh not involved, but be aware and, keep an eye on things just to make sure that isn't happening. If senior management is also talking to senior management on the client side of the agency, um, things get noticed then too. So it's at different levels. All right,
Absolutely.
let's look at that's a point. That's a great point. So think about it, folks. Body language has a lot to do with um signs that things may not be working as they should be. Point number two, Vivek.
Point number two. Um, this one is generally the client towards the agency. But typically, when the client is micromanaging the agency, that's a terrible sign. It's an immediate tell that something is not right. What do I mean by micromanaging the agency? Well, it's basically when the client mandates what the work should look like, who should work on the account, who shouldn't work on the account. And at a more extreme level, and this is something that I absolutely disagree with. When the client starts to mandate what sort of profits you can make on the account, which in my opinion is none of their business. Just as no one questions the profits they make on their business. Shouldn't work that way with agencies either. And the most extreme version of micromanagement that I see is when the client imposes penalties for perceived underperformance, the famous malus, which I think is an absolute abomination and should not exist.
Sure.
So there you go. Just in case you didn't know what I thought about this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Quite common in the business. And you start off a new relationship, and you win most of the time. You win based on providing a solid recommendation to run a business, a solid pitch. You've put forward some solid thinking. And then you find out that, the client is making the logo bigger, is changing the number of frames that are on a certain piece of video, and getting into the micromanagement and the detail of the work that shouldn't happen, frankly. There needs to be a level of trust, and I say trust because that also dovetails into the points of, agency profit margins and the malus, which is the penalty for not committing. But there needs to be a level of trust that needs to be established upfront, mutual respect, trust about working together as a team, focused on delivering on the objectives and not on finding why they're not doing their work right. I have had clients that would, focus on, let's see what the agency doesn't do right so that we can penalize them, or, overwhelm them or whatever. And that's terrible. It's a terrible attitude. It doesn't build team. It doesn't build creativity. Comes, whether it's media or creative or content development or whatever, creativity comes also because there's freedom in the relationship to be able to do this and not fear. There's respect and so forth. Talking about malices, there's a lot of contracts right now where the client and the agency agree to a certain amount, and not 100% is paid during the whole period. Only 85 or 90% of the amount is paid. And unless the agency achieves certain goals, they don't get the other 10%, which would be 100% of the contract. That is not a way to do a contract. You do a contract and you pay the agency 100% of what you agree to. If you want to, at the end of the year, there's an evaluation. There shouldn't be a penalty. What there should be is the possibility of putting the account up to pitch, period. If you're not happy with your agency, try to find out why, try to fix it, try to have a conversation. And if ultimately the divorce is coming, the divorce is coming. But you got to work on making it work right. You got to work on making it work right from the beginning. If you start with a distrustful situation where you're going to penalize the agency and not give them 100% of what you agreed to, not good. No bueno.
What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And no marketing director will ever accept a contract where he's only paid 85% of his salary and will only get 100% of his salary subject to performance. That he will never accept that. So why is that inflicted on the agency?
Right.
If pay them 100%, offer them a bonus. If they didn't do a good job, don't give them the bonus. Just like in the case of the marketing director.
Right.
If he didn't do a good job, he doesn't get his bonus. That's fair. But the malice, no, it's not fair. It's bullying. It's just straight up bullying. in my
Well,
opinion.
it comes from I'll tell you where it comes from, though. It comes from the fact that agency make promises that they can't keep. So there's a level of distrust that happens there. This is where you're going to get find out right away, by the way. You get found out right away. This is not good. If you're an agency CEO, you don't want to promise something you can't deliver on. You'll get find out right away, and you won't be in business in a couple of years. Period. Okay. So have that genuine discussion about what you can do and what you can't do. And that's important from the very beginning when you go into pitch. So,
Absolutely.
and another reason why, sorry to say this, but I'm not sorry to say this, sorry, but this is what we do. And as consultants, we help clients and agencies find the right match so that the work and the expectations that are defined are met. Quite simple.
So
All
let's
right.
move on to the third one.
Yeah, go ahead.
This one is I'm gonna use an expression to describe it because it's kind of hard to describe it otherwise. But I like to talk about this as being the elephant in the room. What does that mean? The expression means that when there's an elephant in a room, everyone knows it's there, but no one is willing to talk about it.
Mhm.
And how does this translate to a relationship? Well, sometimes everyone knows that there's a problem. Everyone knows who the problem is or what the problem is. And yet, for some reason, you just cannot address it. You cannot acknowledge its existence. And it's there and it's making things worse. And there's nothing that anyone does about it. So that's why I call it the elephant in the room.
Right.
Have you ever dealt with an elephant in the room problem?
Too many times. Too many times. And a lot of it has to do with, again, going back to a little bit of the trust issue, but the ability to say to the client, hey, wait a minute, there's something here that need you to talk to you about. And when you don't have that ability to say things as openly or as freely, that's when you start avoiding dealing issues that are pretty obvious in plain sight. So,
You know, this issue particularly happens often when the more senior marketing people are not up to par.
correct.
And it's extremely dangerous for the agency to point it out. And it's extremely dangerous for the junior marketers to point it out. But everyone has a sense that, yeah, that's the problem. And I think that's where the highest level at the client side has to step in and address it, because otherwise it just can't be addressed.
I think it's very much a parallel issue because sometimes the senior agency leader doesn't really get involved in the account, really lets the junior people run it. And they don't have the experience to see issues. And then all of a sudden you have a couple of fire drills going on. And that's because the work isn't being addressed properly, because it hasn't been briefed properly, because there hasn't been certain conversations, etc. And this is where we suggest a certain level of senior involvement just to make sure that things are fine, and the ability to have private conversations as well at the senior level of the client and the agency to say, look, as they say in Latin America, a calzón quitado, let's just say things the way they
You
are.
translate that one.
You're right. Calzón quitado means, open up no pants. That's the literal thing. But it means
It's worse than that, actually.
but it's open. It's about being open, right? It's about being open and be transparent. So a calzón quitado, that means we need to say things that we need to say, and they may not exactly be the nicest things in the world. So
I like your translation. It's very politically correct. A
uh,
calzón quitado is a little bit more than just pants.
yeah, I know, but
We're not going to go there.
right.
Okay, the
Point
number
four.
four.
Yeah.
Point number four. Um, when a relationship is not working properly, there's a lot of us versus them going on. Uh, the team fragments and it becomes the agency people and the marketing people. It's us versus them, and it's not we as a team. And the telltale signs of us versus them is when there's a lot of finger pointing going on, when projects don't work out as expected. It's always someone's fault and that person will be blamed, or that person will find ways to cover their ass and not be blamed and shift the blame somewhere else.
Sure.
And that doesn't work again. This is in this business, there's going to be things that don't work. There's going to be stops and starts. That's just the nature of it. And you really can't be blaming, finger pointing all the
Right.
time.
The ultimate success of the work is the relationship really working together, honestly. I've been in a very recent situation where the client would not respond in writing, would message certain agreements, but not very straightforward. Would say, I don't have time to read emails. I'm telling you the way it is right now. Here's the brief, And when you put things in writing, it actually makes them nervous afterwards, because I would do that. Here's what we agreed. And, I would have to actually pull them aside and say, the reason why we put things in writing is to give us clear direction, an agency, but it's also a tool for you to evaluate the work, right? If the brief says red, we're going to put red on the work. Okay. Not blue, not green, not anything else. But it's fair to say, hey, I've decided to change my mind. I want to do something. That's fair. But not blame the agency because the work wasn't done right from the beginning. So it's awful. I personally told my people, don't get an approval from WhatsApp. We understand that things are moving at a faster pace, but there's nothing wrong at the end of the day with writing an email saying, here are the 3 things that we agreed to. Go ahead. Period. Get that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Whenever people don't have time for reading emails or for writing complete briefs, there's a large element of CYA going on already.
Oh yeah.
That's another dead giveaway.
And that is a poor excuse, Vivek. Let me tell you.
It is.
It's a poor excuse. I don't have time. Give me a break. Because then I follow some people also on social media, but they have time to post stuff on social media, by the way,
It's true.
or whatever.
Well, just to build on this thing and maybe go off on a tangent for a second. I think one of the reasons that clients are allowed to be as imprecise as they are is because there is no cost to them for rework.
Right.
So if a project has to be done 3 or 4 times before you get it right, it costs the client exactly the same amount of money. He may waste some time, but it's hard to put time into a P&L. There's actually no extra money being spent by the client. Whenever you want a client to respond to you, make sure he understands that it's going to cost him money. Then all of a sudden his attitude will change.
Right.
Anyhow.
Talking about money, why don't you go on to point number 5?
Okay.
I got a few stories on that one, let me tell you.
I will lay out the tell and hand it over to you so you can tell the stories. So this one is when everyone knows that X agreement doesn't make sense and it's going to blow up sooner or later. It is in some way another elephant in the room, but it often has to do with contracts. So have at it.
I've had a few of those. Let me first state that if the contract is bad from the beginning, there's very little chance it'll get fixed later. Okay, the thinking is, well, let's bring in the client and then we'll see how we'll work it out, and and we'll fix it, and we'll ask them for an increased fee, or we'll make some money here on production. And one, you'll never fix the problem. Two, it leads you to think that you can make money in other ways, which if it's not in the contract, you don't want to do. Okay,
Sure.
very, very simple. But ultimately, a bad contract doesn't allow the agency to have the right support and skill sets and meet the agreements that have been decided with the client. You need to have this conversation up front. If you're not paying me I can't put someone 100% on your business. And it's interesting because you get a lot of requests for, I want a dedicated team, but I don't want to pay for it. Let's see how no. And you got to build in the cost of the team. And it's not just salaries, it's the government trailers, and it has to be your overhead, and it has to be your profit margin as well. And that's a conversation. There's a lot of really smart clients who know how to do this well and have outstanding teams, low rotation, great work, people who are motivated to work on their business because they know that there's not going to be a contract issue. When your agency is thinking about a contract issue all the time, you never get out of that spiral.
And a short-sighted client will push back and say, well, hell, that's the agency's problem. That's not my problem. You go and fix it. But the truth is that it is the client's problem, because it's going to show up in lackluster work and lackluster results over the next 6 to 8 months, 10 months. So it's going to affect the client. It's not just an agency issue. It will affect the client, and it's short-sighted. It's dumb. But unfortunately, it happens quite often. It shouldn't, but it does.
My last, before signing contracts, I would speak with not just the procurement people, but with a senior client or the CEO and say, are we sure we feel good about this? Because if not, I mean, what do you call it? It's dead man walking from day one. You sign the contract and you say to yourself, let's see how we're going to deal with this. And then then the clock starts counting backwards on, well, let's see how long we'll hold on to this client. I've had one situation, Vivek, where after 6 months, the whole thing blew up. And I knew it was going to blow up because we made a mistake. The agency made a mistake to commit to a pricing even before the pitch started, driven by a poor consultant, I must say. And we made a mistake and we couldn't get out of it. So, and the client knew it and sort of was like, I'm going to take advantage of the agency here, and it was stupid, dumb.
And it's we talk about these situations in cold clinical terms, but when that account blows up, a lot of innocent people are going to lose their jobs.
I know, that's terrible.
So there's a lot of pain and suffering that could be avoided up front. Yeah. So anyhow, those are the five hiding in plain sight tells that we want to talk about in this podcast. Let me just quickly summarize them. Number one, bad body language. Number two, micromanagement by the client. Number three, the quote, elephant in the room. Number four, an us versus them attitude instead of a we attitude. And the fifth one is agreements that are unviable, but you still go along with them.
We bring up these points to everyone because these are things that need to be discussed. that sometimes are not often enough are not discussed. And by the way, I mean, you know, this is what we do at Think Catalyst. We help advertisers find the right agencies. We help agencies and advertisers work out their issues on processes. We help them establish clear rules of how they're going to engage and how they're going to work together. And ultimately deliver on a better relationship and a better business result, which is what we want to do. So if you want to know more about it, please DM me or Vivek or call us. Look us up in our website. There's some information about what we do and a bit more detail on some of our products and services. But a worthwhile investment that will pay itself out very, very well. When you have great work, when you have teams working together, when you have motivated people, when you have less turnover, and when your cash register is going and you're building businesses. So final thoughts, Vivek?
Well, the usual like, share, comment,
Right.
give us your feedback. And one final request. If you have one of these hiding in plain sight tells that you want to share with us that we haven't talked about, let us know. Maybe we will include it in the next podcast.
We'd love to hear from you. Please give us your feedback. Thank you very much for this week's podcast. Vivek, have a good one. We've got a busy week in front of us with a lot of
Yes,
stuff.
we do.
The year has started already. Pitch season has started. Relationships are being reviewed. A lot of stuff going on. So we are definitely busy. Appreciate everyone listening to our audience. See you next week.
Take care, guys.
Bye.